A very good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome all of you to our Polar Routes, the latest installment of our Polar Routes Inspiration series. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, so hopefully you can see me properly, and we'll get back to that in just a moment. My name is Martin Johnson. I'm the co-founder and director of Polar Routes. It's a pleasure to have so many of you here on the eve of a very big day in the diary tomorrow, I'm sure, for everyone. So we are going to transport you away from all of that over the next hour with a fantastic session, all focused on the incredible explorer, Sir Ernest Shackleton. More on that just to come. We're also going to be tying it a little bit into our ultimate Antarctic expedition departure. So I'll talk to you more about that as well coming up. And so what I'm just going to do is just share my screen again so I can give you the exact details of what's coming up tonight. So, we have a fantastic special guest this evening, Kate Jamieson, who is a renowned naval historian, and she's going to be telling us all about the remarkable life of the polar explorer, Sir Ernest Shackleton. The reason that she is also very significant is because she is also one of our special guests on our own Antarctic cruise that we've put together that we've called the Ultimate Antarctic Expedition Cruise. So I'm also going to tell you a little bit more about that. We've got a mixture of people tonight joining us by the looks of the guest list. We've got some of you whom are already booked onto that cruise. So a very warm welcome to you if you're already booked on, and I'm sure you'll find the next hour super inspiring and hopefully whet your appetite for what's to come in February 2025. Some of you registered for the first time to Polar Routes, so a very warm welcome. I'll give you a little quick introduction to Polar Routes and what we do in just a moment, and also some regular faces to the Polar Routes Inspiration series by the looks of it. So a very warm welcome back to you guys. I think you're going to find tonight a really great session. So what is going to come up is some details about our Ultimate Antarctic Expedition cruise, including some updates for those of you who are already booked that I think you'll find interesting as well. I'll then hand over as much time as possible to Kate Jamieson, who will join us for that. Afterwards, there will be some questions and hopefully some time for some questions and answers. And then we'll have the wrap up and our prize draw. And tonight, if I can advance the slide, hopefully. Tonight, we have two prizes to choose from. We're talking about Sir Ernest Shackleton, so it feels only right to have one of our prizes dedicated to him. It is a bottle of Shackleton's whiskey. It's a blended malt scotch that apparently was put together based on the recipe that he liked to drink. But if you're not a drinker, we also have our amazing chocolate brownies from Pink Pepper Kitchen in the limited edition polar bear tin. So that's the choice of prizes. As those of you who've joined us before know, you must still be here at the end to claim your prize. So do stay tuned and we'll do the prize draw at the end. For those of you that are new to Polar Routes altogether, just to quickly introduce us, just a couple of slides. Polar Routes, we are an expedition cruise wholesaler, and we work with over 20, in fact, actually it's 25 now, that slide's a little old, leading expedition cruise operators, primarily at the looking at the polar regions, so everything in Antarctica, everything in places like in the Arctic, in places like Svalbard, Greenland, the Northwest Passage, North Pole even, and beyond, and Alaska and beyond. We, as a wholesaler, can compare all of the operators' itineraries, their ships, their prices and inclusions to help you find your perfect expedition cruise. All of the team at Polar Routes are first-hand travelled to the polar regions aboard expedition ships and have detailed knowledge of all the ships and operators that we work with. We package the cruise with exciting with flights, transfers, and exciting land packages as well. If you want to do a little bit more before or after the cruise. Coming up on your screen, just some of the operators that we work with, names on there that you'll have heard of, and some great specialists that you may not. We'll compare them all for you to find your perfect cruise. But what we have also done which is what we're here to talk a little bit more about tonight, is using. We've been looking at doing this for a while, and this has been well over a year now in the making and planning, and it has been on sale because a number of you are indeed already booked. But we basically took the leap a little while ago to design and create our own expedition cruise, and we call it the Ultimate Antarctic Expedition Cruise. So we combined all of the expertise of myself and the team at Polar Routes to basically put together something that I believe is a little bit unique in the market, which I'll come on to in just a moment, to really offer one of the most incredible ways to see Antarctica. So over 23 incredible days you'll visit and experience the very best of Antarctica. Our route is going to go and spend a really good amount of time down in the Antarctic Peninsula on the western side. It's then going to go give an opportunity to visit Elephant Island, which I'm sure we'll be hearing about a little bit more in just a moment. We've then got a really good amount of time to explore South Georgia properly, and a couple of days in the Falkland Islands as well. This particular cruise that we're looking at has an all-out focus on exploration, which we have done because our maximum group size is going to be just 66 passengers, which, to put that into context, is around about a third of the size of a typical 200-passenger expedition ship in today's market. So the idea is that you will see as much of Antarctica as possible, and you'll be doing it in a really small group. This is our ship. It's the MV Ushuaia. We are capping it at 66 passengers. The ship does take a few more, but we're capping it there. So with our group size, there is a maximum exploration time. So when we come to a landing site, we can spend as much time as we like there, or as much time as is available to spend there. There's no need for group landings. There'll be no need for Group A to come out and come back before Group B can come out. We don't have to manage people around. The Antarctica, as many of you know, has a maximum of 100 people on shore. We will be well under that, which gives us complete flexibility in our program. The MV Ushuaia is a veteran ship. I'll come on to a few pictures in just a moment, but there is loads and loads of deck space for wildlife and landscape observation as well on board. We've got 8 Zodiacs for fast disembarkation, so we should be getting on and off the ship within 20 to 25 minutes typically in good conditions. And as mentioned, the itinerary has 4 full days exploring the Antarctic Peninsula, a visit to Elephant Island, 4.5 days exploring South Georgia, and 2 full days in the Falkland Islands, as well as the sail time between. So on every full expedition day, you can expect 2 off-ship landings or excursions of up to about 3 hours each. This is all weather dependent, conditions dependent, but that's what we're aiming for. That's what we will be able to do if conditions serve us well. The Zodiacs will be able to get everyone off quickly and together. And once on land, there will be a variety of activities of different levels to help you really make the most of that particular location and all of your time ashore. What that means is if you want to do something active and adventurous and head off where it's possible to do, say, up to a ridge for a great view, or as part of a group going walking, then you can do that and be very active. If you don't and you want to spend time near to the shore side, perhaps observing some penguins, or perhaps just being there in the moment, then you'll have the option for that as well. So we're going to split what we do on land to make sure that there's something for everyone, and you can mix and match in each landing site. So you can have an active morning and a more relaxed afternoon if you want. There's no sign-up forms, there's no availability issues. You'll be able to choose as you go. Every step of the way will be accompanied by an experienced team of 5 expedition staff, including our expedition leader, as well as 2 special guests, which we'll come on to in just a moment. The MV Ushuaia is a veteran expedition ship. She has crossed the Drake's Passage over 600 times and counting, and has just completed the season before the last one a complete refurbishment of all of its a lot of the cabins and all of the public areas, and has never looked better. There is a great hub of the ship is the main lounge, which you'll see here. And apologies for the photo, it's not the best, but hopefully it does get across. It's a great space for everyone to be. There is a great bar in here. There's a coffee and 24-hour coffee and tea station We can do lectures and presentations in here. There are windows on 3 sides, so lots of natural light, lots of great views out into the passing scenery as you spend time in this lounge. So this is very much the hub of the ship. Beyond what there is also is a presentation lounge, which gives us such enormous flexibility because we can do things in the main. If we're doing something in the main lounge, like a presentation you don't want to go, there's a secondary space that you can enjoy. Or perhaps if we're doing a workshop on, say, photography and it's not all of the ship are involved, we can do that in the presentation lounge. So we have a secondary space in there, which just gives enormous flexibility for our time on board. There's a great restaurant on board, again, with windows out to see what's going on outside. All the meals will be included. It's generally buffet for breakfast and lunch, and then a la carte or course by course for dinner. Really good quality food. Not it's not going to be super sort of Michelin star food, but it will be tasty, it will be hearty, and the menu changes every single day. So great variety there as well. It's incredible what the chefs can do down in Antarctica. Also, just worth mentioning, open bridge policy on board as well. In such a small group, we will get to know the staff of the ship super well. They will get to know us. The bridge is open at all times unless navigating or through perhaps heavy ice or requested by the captain, but generally always an open bridge policy. So a great view from up there. And as mentioned before, ample deck space as well. The bow of the ship is open except if it's required by the crew. So that's there, and this picture on the right hand side is on the top deck. So there's pretty much full 360-degree views available from the top deck. So you have got plenty of space to find. There's a variety of cabins on board, which start in the best value. The best value ones start as a bunk or a bunk cabin on the left hand side. You've got there, which we've got options for twin share, but we also have a number of these available for solo. So if you want to pick and choose the top or bottom bunk, then you can take it on a solo basis and have it to yourself. The picture on the right-hand side is a twin porthole cabin. Our most popular ones and the ones that we've got the least availability in is the Premier Twin and the Deluxe Twin, which have got full picture windows rather than portholes. They're also on the upper deck, so a bit closer to the sort of getting out on deck and near a bit nearer the main lounge. The Deluxe Twins are a little bit larger. They're also in the most central position on the ship as well. We also have some suites and a captain suite. Again, just a couple of these available as well. And as you can see, what you're getting there is a lounge space as well as a sort of bedroom area as well. And in addition, we've also added for anyone booking a suite, you will also get return Black Lane airport transfers, departure airport lounge access, upgrade to our superior room to our hotel in Buenos Aires, $250 drinks credit per suite, $50 laundry credit, in-suite coffee machine, oh, that's not spelled correctly, and a pair of Viking Badger 10 times 50 binoculars, which will be yours to keep. That's one per suite, and a few other touches as well. It's just for suites, main cabins. I'll go through the details in just a moment. This is our itinerary that we have been through. So you can see we are starting on the 4th of February 2025 and finishing back in Ushuaia on the 26th of February 2025. So the length of the itinerary is designed to give us a really good amount of time for exploring the key areas of the Antarctic Peninsula, South Georgia, a visit to Elephant Island and the Falkland Islands. And this is our potential route. And I have to say potential route because in expedition, I'll go on to it in just a moment, everything is for negotiation depending on all sorts of things like sea conditions, weather, wind, and what's favourable and what's great to see. But the first part of the cruise will come across the Drake's Passage. It will come in at the top of the screen, and it will come through past places like potential landing sites like Deception Island. It will come down to perhaps the Lemaire Channel, to places like Nico Harbour, potentially to places like Port Lockroy, which, as you may know, is the Penguin Post Office, which there was a BBC programme that's well worth having a look. I think it's still around on iPlayer. We may make landings there. Danko Island, another fantastic one. And once we've spent a really good amount of time exploring this Antarctic Peninsula, we will then begin to make our way up Oh, sorry, here's some pictures of the Antarctic Peninsula. This is the same one I've got behind me. It's actually one that I took on a trip earlier, quite a few years ago now. But you can just see there people sort of milling about, not the ship we're on. This is just a highlight, if you want to do something active, this is the kind of scenery, the kind of places and scenery that you can get to with a little bit of a walk. But of course, if you don't want to do that, there's still plenty to see at the shore side, like these guys as well. Um, After continuing up north, we will then visit Elephant Island. Now, this place is super significant. I'm sure Kate will come onto it, but it is basically where Shackleton and his men had to take refuge for a very long time in the end. It is a really interesting place, and we have covered this a lot in the description, and we'll cover it now. Elephant Island is a very exposed piece of rock, I suppose. An island is an amazingly mystical place. It could be that we may not be able to make landfall here if the winds are too strong or the seas are too rough. It might be that we're able to do a Zodiac cruise here. We may even be able to make landfall here. So the picture I'm going to show you is in the worst case scenario. This is Elephant Island on a not great day, but I think you can still get an impression of what an emotive place it is even from that. So this is worst case scenario, I guess, and then we will aim to do better with the conditions presented to us on the day. Up to South Georgia. We're going to come into South Georgia unusually for a lot of cruises, hopefully on the western side of the island. And the idea is that we make landfall in King Haakon Bay. King Haakon Bay is where Shackleton and his men landed when they went there. It's a great place. I'll show you a picture of that in just a moment. We will then come around South Georgia and spend the rest of the time on the more sort of traditional eastern areas. We might visit places like Salisbury Plain, Fortuna Bay, Stromness, which is a former whaling station, and St Andrews Bay, which is the home to over 500,000 king penguins, which is just the most incredible sight. And also Grytviken, which I'll come on to in just a moment. King Haakon Bay looks like this. This is at sunrise. Going into King Haakon Bay, South Georgia, this is the kind of scenery you're going to expect to see there. So it'll be very different to, quite different, sorry, to Antarctica, which is obviously very white, as you can see behind me. South Georgia is much more of a mixture of perhaps snow-capped mountains, tundra, grasses, even microflora and fauna as well. And of course, you're never too far away from penguins and seals and all sorts of incredible wildlife there as well. This is your St Andrews Bay picture, 500,000 breeding pairs of king penguins. And this is Grytviken, famous for two reasons. It's where the South Georgia Heritage Trust is based. It's also where Shackleton is buried. Again, not wishing to steal too much thunder. There is a great, there's a post office here as well. There's a great museum which goes into the whaling history of South Georgia and Antarctica as well, and an area that we hope to be able to get into to visit. Some South Georgia updates for you. It has been a few questions that we've been asked by those that are booked. Mainly around the bird flu, the avian bird flu that has reached Antarctica as it's reached most of the world now. Last year there was some regulations put into place, particularly in South Georgia, regarding landing sites. The government of South Georgia has now declared that basically for the coming South Georgia season, they are not going to put restrictions in place on landing sites. The decision as to whether it's right to land will be left with the expedition leaders of our ship and all the ships that are going, and the minimum distances are the same minimum distances that are set on any other season. There will be enhanced biosecurity, so that's the sort of watching of the boots and making sure we don't take any foreign bodies with us or take any onto land, which is all the stuff that we will do on our ship as well as all the other ships as well. But really good news there that there's not going to be any sort of draconian closures or things of sites unless it's in a particularly extreme situation, which we're not foreseeing. So that's really positive news. Also, other positive news in South Georgia as well is that in Grytviken, hopefully, again, we will make landing fall there. It's one of the easier places to get into because of its location in a fjord. But they have just recently finished a restoration of one of the biggest buildings in Grytviken. So normally with Grytviken, you get the post office and the museum that's there, and you can peer through the windows of some of the buildings, but they've actually opened up and refurbished the ground floor of the biggest one that's there, which was an original Whalers store. So I'm really excited to go and see that. I've never seen in any of the buildings in South Georgia. So some really positive news. The route that we will take will then finish with a couple of sites in the Falklands. We're going to hopefully get into Port Stanley. I say hopefully because Port Stanley is notorious for being able to or not get into, but hopefully we'll have a day in Port Stanley and then a day over in the Western Falklands. Port Stanley, as you know, home a little slice of Britain in the Falkland Islands. It's a great little town, and it's going to be really interesting to see. There's also a chance, after being at sea for quite some time, perhaps for a meal on land, perhaps some fish and chips, or maybe even a beer at a pub, if you wish, as well, is a common thing people do there. And this is the western side. This will be our last exploration day before we head back to Ushuaia over in the Western Falklands. And there's quite a few places that we'll have to choose from when we get round there. So as mentioned, just to cover, because it's important, an expedition cruise. Embracing the unknown is part of the adventure. Everything I've just mentioned are potential options. It's not a firm plan. There's always a need in expedition cruising and or a desire to adjust the itinerary based on factors such as weather, sea conditions, wildlife, and local conditions, and things that are favourable. If we see something spectacular, why rush off just because we have a program that says that says we need to? We have got complete flexibility to make the most of our time down there on our ship. Also, just to mention for those of you that are booked and anyone who's potentially considering coming with us, we do have our pre and post cruise packages as well. So the cruise, which are going to after Kate, includes a night in Buenos Aires. We have an additional sort of night in Buenos Aires, which also includes a city tour, great tango show. I think the Malbec tastings on there as well. So if you, hopefully if you booked, you have been sent these details, but if not, do ask your travel specialist. So if you fancy an extra night and joining us a little earlier, then that's available. Is when we get off the ship in a Schwarzschild half-day Tierra del Fuego National Park excursion. That has an extra charge, but for those that don't take that, you'll have a morning or a little bit of time in Ushuaia to look around there. And then we have a post-cruise package, which is just a final night in Buenos Aires as well. So we have an amazing lineup of expertise. As I said, we will have some great expedition staff that will be provided by the ship. We also have our expedition leader, Jamie Watts, who's a well-renowned marine ecologist. We also have our photographer in residence, Lewis Freeth, who's the curator of planetary portrayal, some incredible pictures, and he'll be capturing images from our landings and putting them together into a great video at the end, plus helping you with any tips and tricks of your own photographer. But most importantly as to why we're here, our other special guest is renowned naval historian Kate Jamieson. We've been having a great chat before, and I learned that she also is such a great naval historian. She appeared on Mastermind, so I think that sets a really high bar. She's a council member for the Society for Nautical Research, the Navy Record Society, and the 1805 Club, and is a celebrated naval historian. She regularly delivers fascinating talks and has been invited to speak by such great organisations as the Royal Navy, Royal Air Force, British Army, BBC, National Geographic. The list goes on. She's appeared on TV a number of times as well, including my grandparents' war with Keira Knightley, of all people. Kate will be on board our cruise, sharing her passion for the great explorers of Antarctica through a series of onboard lectures. But tonight, hopefully, she's there. And if I can invite her to put her camera on, she is here to talk about Shackleton. She is there. You were just making me nervous. I'm going to stop my screen share there. You're on mute, Kate, just so you
I
know.
know, yeah.
Um,
Just the
hi,
screen.
yeah. So, Kate, hi. Thank you so much, and we're really looking forward to having you on board. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on board. But I will hand over to you. And just to say before I head off, if you have any questions for either Kate or myself, pop them into the chat. I think it's now chat because Zoom's changed. So there's a chat at the bottom. Pop them in there, but we will cover them at the end of the session. So I'll come back on and we'll go through any good questions that are in there and ask them of either Kate or myself, and then we'll do the prize draw. But that's it, Kate. I'll hand over to you. Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. My name's Kate. I'm a naval and maritime historian. as Martin just said, usually focusing on the long 18th century and the Royal Navy, but regularly speaking on kind of wider maritime history and explorers. I actually had the privilege last year of visiting the Falkland Islands and lecturing for personnel who were stationed there on Nelson and Trafalgar randomly, as well as Shackleton, Scott, and a kind of mix of their leadership styles. So thanks for having me. And thank you for spending your evening listening to me harp on about someone who I admire so much that I have his family motto tattooed on me, which is probably an indication for the interest, I guess. So without further ado, I will go on and introduce you, if I can get my slide to go, to a man who needs no introduction, Sir Ernest Shackleton. I don't know if you can see my camera seems to be right over the top of my slide, so hopefully you can all still see
It's all
this.
it's all good, Kate. I can
Yeah,
see it
okay,
fine.
fine. I just want to check everybody could see it. So here is Shackleton, obviously on the left. He's one, I guess, of history's kind of most renowned explorers. He obviously became a key figure in the era that we now refer to as the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. And I think his legacy is predominantly defined by the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition, or as a lot of people refer to it, the Endurance Expedition from 1914 to 1917, during which, of course, the Endurance was trapped and eventually destroyed by the ice. Now, Shackleton's leadership ability really, really shone through. He guided his crew to safety through so many different challenges, including an extraordinary voyage in an open boat across some of the world's most treacherous waters, which we will obviously be sailing through. Hopefully they won't be too treacherous when we go. He was also once honoured as the 11th greatest Briton. Now, this one causes me a little bit of concern because he was one below John Lennon. I feel like I would have switched those round. He was also John Lennon was above Horatio Nelson, which I do take some umbrage at, but there we are. So why was exploration important in this period? Well, in the early 20th century, it was important for numerous reasons. You had the expansion of geographical knowledge, you had people mapping uncharted territories, you had them advancing biological science by obviously looking at all the unique plants and animals. And also they were contributing to a lot of kind of climate and meteorological data collection, which we're still using today, and providing information on kind of global weather patterns. And obviously there's the economic side of that too. So the whaling that Martin mentioned down in South Georgia, and obviously the discovery of new resources or expansion of those fishing and whaling areas. On top of that, these expeditions were really a source of national pride. And whilst they were a kind of means of for countries to kind of assert those territorial claims, they were also just really cool, no pun intended, and inspiring at a time where people really needed that, I think, and that push for resilience and challenges in the face of adversity were kind of seen as heroic exploits, and they were really embodied by people like Scott and Amundsen and of course Shackleton. And that idea of pushing our limits through exploration is something that continues to this day, I think, especially with people like Sir Ranulph Fiennes, who has incidentally written a fantastic book on Shackleton, a biography of Shackleton, which I would recommend anyone read if they haven't yet done so. So looking at Shackleton's early life and career, this is him on the right, age 16, not one of the pictures that you see most often. He was born in Ireland in 1874, and he was the second of 10 children. His family then moved to London. He went to Dulwich College. A few of the stories from his time there basically told us that he was frequently bored by most of the subjects. He wasn't interested in team sports, which is interesting considering that he went on to, have such an active part in teamwork. And he was supposedly very fond of both a practical joke and fighting. So he gained the nickname the Fighting Shackleton at one point. But for the most part, his nicknames were Mick and Mike and Mickey due to his Irish heritage, something we'd probably frown upon today. Now, one of his school friends once actually said that he was really bad at swimming. He couldn't swim, which bodes well for the next part of his life, where he decided he didn't want to follow his father's footsteps and become a doctor. He wanted to go to sea, obviously. Perfect for someone who doesn't swim. But he did just that when he turned 16. He joined the Merchant Navy. This was in part because it would have cost £70 a year for his family to send him to Britannia, which was the naval training ship in Dartmouth, and they just couldn't afford it. Even Dulwich was, I think, £15 or £20 a year, just for some context. So his first voyage, once he joined the Merchant Navy, was to Valparaiso, so around Cape Horn. in a square rigger where he quite literally had to learn the ropes. And very quickly, they arrived 4 months later, loaded their cargo, and then sailed home to Liverpool, where he had to kind of make the decision about whether he wanted to leave or stay at sea. He once said later in life that if he'd had to make a decision and if he'd hated the sea, he would have probably still stuck to it, but he didn't hate it. He found it quite a hard life. And this quote here, my father thought to cure me of my predilection for the sea by letting me go in the most primitive manner possible as a boy on board a sailing ship at a shilling a month. By the time he turned 18, he reached first mate, which was quite impressive. And only 6 years later, when he was 24, he was a certified master mariner, so able to take any British ship really anywhere in the world. He also became very interested in exploration at this point in time, obviously with where he was sailing around Cape Horn, etc. He was quite interested and he joined the Royal Geographical Society. And then he later heard of news of an expedition heading to Antarctica. Now, at this point in time, he was very ambitious. He wanted to make a name for himself, not least to impress the person who would go on to become his wife later. So he jumped at this opportunity and managed to network his way into the position of third officer on the Discovery. Now, Discovery was captained by Robert Falcon Scott, this chap on the left, who I'm sure also needs very little introduction. But just in case, he was a Royal Navy officer. He'd been in the Royal Navy for 18 years at this point and was starting to get a little bored, a little tired of the kind of monotony of what he was up to. So while he was in the West Indies, he met a chap called Clements Markham. And Clements basically was so impressed by Scott that he said that he was the destined man to command the Antarctic expedition he was planning, which obviously worked out quite well for Scott. So this was his first expedition to Antarctica. He obviously went on to become a pretty famous explorer in his own right. Spoiler alert, sadly dying on his return from the South Pole in 1912. Now, Scott played quite an important role in Shackleton's life over the years, but they did get off to a pretty frosty start. Scott didn't particularly enjoy having civilians on his ship for a start, and didn't matter whether they were reservists or not. He just didn't want him there. So the Discovery, which actually had been built for this expedition specially, sailed from Dundee in 1901, and then they arrived in Antarctica in January 1902, and they established a base at McMurdo Sound for the winter. The relationship between Scott and Shackleton really deteriorated over this time. Partly, they think because Shackleton had some quite natural leadership skills, the men loved him and he was very popular, and Scott kind of perceived this as a threat. But there were also some issues with preparation and training. No one had really used the skis. They didn't know how to use sled dogs. So they were in for quite a steep learning curve by the time they departed for their trek in November. Now, the core party, as you can see in this photo here, were Shackleton, Scott, and Wilson. Edward Wilson was a surgeon, although they had others laying food and supplies along the route for their return journey. They set off on a pretty significant sledging journey across the Ross Ice Shelf towards the South Pole. Now, their progress was incredibly slow. They faced quite a few challenges. Like I said, they weren't very good at dog handling or experienced, and they also were suffering from scurvy, that wonderful, wonderful disease of the time. Now, by December the 30th, my birthday, they'd reached 82 degrees 17 south, which was a new record, and they were obviously really happy, but Shackleton was incredibly ill. He had scurvy. He also had heart problems, something which he never actually had investigated, and it's what killed him in later years. Again, spoiler alert, sorry. Thankfully, he carried on. It would be a very short talk this evening if he hadn't. But their food supplies were running very, very low, which obviously led to more tension between Shackleton and Scott. And Wilson kind of ended up taking on the role of duty morale chap and taking charge a little bit more than perhaps he'd anticipated. They got back in March of that year, and Shackleton was sent home. He really resented Scott for this because quite a few of the other people on the expedition who were unwell got to stay. But obviously there was that clash of personalities. And when Shackleton got home, he shifted his career a little bit, went into journalism. He married Emily, so he'd obviously impressed her sufficiently by that point, and they had 3 children. He tried a few various, I guess, business plans, money-making schemes. None of them really worked. He tried to enter Parliament as MP for Dundee, also failed. And he also helped randomly form a company to transport troops to Russia. But I think his ambition really was always to just reach the South Pole and kind of succeed where Scott had failed. So in 1907, he decided to design his own trip, which he organized himself with very little official support, getting money from wealthy friends and contacts. And in fact, the whole thing was kind of pulled together actually really, really quickly in a pretty rushed manner. The plan was for them to leave New Zealand in 1908. And this was really, the Nimrod expedition was really the expedition that made Shackleton's name, as it were. Shackleton's original plan had been to go and use the old Discovery base at McMurdo Sound. Scott obviously was thinking of planning another expedition, so he wasn't very happy about it and claimed it kind of as his own, which was fair enough. But then Shackleton arrived and realized that when he went to make camp, the ice had actually collapsed and it was too dangerous to stay where he wanted to. So they decided to break that promise to Scott, camping near the Discovery quarters, which again, probably fair enough given the circumstances. So they unloaded all of their supplies and set off on their great southern journey towards the South Pole with Frank Wild, a name you will need to remember for later. He'd been part of Scott's expedition, Eric Marshall, who was an army doctor, and Jameson Adams, who was a sub-lieutenant in the Royal Navy, but decided that being second in command of Shackleton was far more interesting, so decided to head off with him instead. So Shackleton managed to correct, I guess, quite a lot of the mistakes that Scott had made. So he had fresh meat for everybody to try and prevent scurvy. He decided to use ponies instead of dogs. Now the ponies actually struggled. One of them, Socks, actually fell into a crevasse and almost took Frank Wild with him. Not great. The people they really needed to have spoken to before this was the Norwegians, because they'd been down there a lot. They knew how to use dog teams. And if you've been to any talks by Sir Ranulph Fiennes, you will know that the Norwegians are not his favourite people, nor were they anyone's favourite people at the time particularly, but they would have managed to learn some useful lessons about how to use the dogs effectively. But in November, they did manage to beat Scott's previous record. They got within 97 miles of the pole, but Shackleton decided that they were going to turn back because they were low on rations and he didn't want to risk the lives of his team. Now, Frank Wild, at this point, not having a great time. He had dysentery, couldn't really eat, and they all had gastroenteritis from eating dodgy pony meat. So not great. But Shackleton at one point insisted that Frank should have his breakfast biscuit, and Frank Wild never forgot it and always said that it was kind of a testament to the man that he was. And really, that decision to turn back is what saved their lives, I think, given what happened with Scott's later fatal expedition. As they got back closer to the ship, the Nimrod, they realized that they needed to be spotted. They set fire to a wooden hut and everyone saw them. And Frank Wild said that seeing the ship was the happiest moment of his life. Shackleton returned to England. He was a hero. He got knighted. Roald Amundsen, the Norwegian explorer, was very much celebrating him and thought he was great. Unfortunately, he was still broke. He got a £20,000 grant from the government, but still had a lot of debt and a lot of crew salaries to pay. So he did that. He managed to work it out by giving lecture tours to support his family. And this quote here from the Dundee Advertiser, I think, sums it all up. From his quiet and often humorous remarks, one might have thought it quite an amusing experience to be frostbitten, to live for months on stale biscuits and pony's flesh, or to be pulled in the nick of time from the edge of a precipice that had just been hidden by the treacherous snow. Got on the next slide. So just for a little bit of context, over here is the point that was reached by the British National Antarctic Expedition. So the first expedition Shackleton went on with Scott and walked down with Scott and Wilson. And this is where they reached on the Nimrod expedition. So obviously, as you can see, there is quite a substantial difference there. But they were still not quite at the South Pole, like I said, 97 miles away. So in the years leading up to 1914, of course, Scott's Terra Nova expedition took place. They left Cardiff in 1910. And by 1912, everyone knew that Roald Amundsen had actually reached the South Pole himself, those pesky Norwegians. But no one really knew what had happened with Scott's expedition at this point. And the idea of crossing Antarctica was one that had been sort of thrown out there a few times by a guy called William Spears Bruce, but he hadn't done it for whatever reason. So Shackleton spoke to him and managed to get the approval amidst all of this kind of run up and turmoil of war in Europe, and managed to go on this expedition to cross Antarctica. Now, the funding came from a variety of people, including Shackleton's friend J.M. Barrie, who obviously wrote Peter Pan, and of course Sir James Caird, for whom one of the lifeboats was named. I think this quote here, which you can see, not only the people of these islands, but our kinsmen in all the lands under the Union Jack will be willing to assist towards the carrying out of the programme of exploration. So Shackleton decided to embark on this. It was his third Antarctic expedition at this point on his ship Endurance. So a lot of people will call it the Endurance expedition. It's because of the Endurance. The ship was actually called the Polaris initially when he bought it. He renamed it to Endurance because his family motto was by endurance we conquer. And his plan essentially was to make, like I said, the first land crossing of Antarctica, to sail to the Weddell Sea, land near Vassal Bay, and then head across the continent via the South Pole. So, like I said, they had the Endurance, which was formerly Polaris, which was actually built for an expedition to Spitsbergen, and the Aurora, which would be the vessel for the supply team. So he had the idea of having the Weddell Sea Party, which you may have heard of. They would head in on the Endurance and continue to the Vassal Bay area. 14 men would then land, of whom 6, I think, under Shackleton, formed the then Transcontinental Party, who would make the full trek. They had 69 dogs, one of which was called Slobber. They had great names, actually, but Slobber is my favorite, I think. 2 sledges and a lot of equipment. It was about an 1,800-mile trek, I think. I don't know what that is in kilometers, quite a few, down to the Ross Sea. And then the remaining members would either carry out scientific work, head on to the other sort of bases along the way to be able to resupply everybody, and then 2 would remain at base camp. Shackleton had quite a diverse team that he'd pulled together. They were multinational. He didn't tend to choose people because he liked them. He wanted them because they had skills that were useful. So he had 2 surgeons. His navigator was a chap called Frank Worsley, who said that he'd applied to the expedition because he heard about it in a dream. Not sure I believe that, because, he heard of it in a dream, but he did get picked for the expedition, so I guess it worked out for him. He had an artist, he had meteorologists, there was a Royal Marine PTI, some seamen, a cook, a carpenter, and 1 stowaway who was put to use pretty quickly. And his second in command, like I said, was none other than Frank Wild, who'd actually obviously been on the expedition with him previously. Dysentery free at this point, thankfully. And I think one of the chaps he selected, because he had skills, he was a scientist, he was a physicist, I think, but also because he could sing. So he kind of wanted people for morale as well, which was probably good, because at one point Shackleton himself actually won the award for worst singer in the crew. So it's good that somebody could carry out a tune. And when they were at sea, Shackleton very much led from the front, but he also ensured everyone was kept busy. So he heard somebody once complaining, asking whether it was actually worth even carrying on. So he sent him off to make a cup of tea, give him something to do. And by doing that, he then decided, oh, well, actually, I've got some other things to do, went off, washed his socks, hung them out to dry. And his men started to sort of refer to him as the boss, which is a name that quite a few people still use to this day. These are 2 pictures, which I'm sure people have seen. And I guess the forerunner to what I'm about to say. The expedition, their journey was halted pretty quickly when they became tracked by pack ice in the Weddell Sea, which is where the expedition to find Endurance was obviously centered a couple of years ago. And the ice was crushing the ship, it was forcing them to drift northward, and they knew that it was going to become really, really difficult, but I don't think they realized quite how bad it was going to become. I think it was about a month and a half later, the pack ice closed in around Endurance. So the crew took it in turns digging through the ice, and they pushed her back 400 meters, which is quite a feat in that weather, but she got stuck again, unfortunately, and she held fast. So one of the chaps on board, the ship's doctor, Alexander Macklin, actually noticed it was at this point that Shackleton's kind of ability to keep everybody calm really showed through. He didn't panic, didn't show any nervousness, and kept everybody engaged, even though they were stuck on a ship that wasn't going anywhere, by planning an expedition to Alaska, which for a group stranded in the middle of a frozen Antarctic Sea probably seemed a little bit insane, but it did keep their minds occupied. They didn't dwell on the situation, and they weren't thinking about potential negative outcomes, I guess. And it clearly seemed to work and gave them a bit of a focus. Around that, they did a lot of reading, they raced the dogs, they played sports, they held concerts. Like I said, Shackleton won the prize of worst singer. But unfortunately, after 327 days in the ice, Endurance was crushed, which is this picture that you can see on the right with the dogs there in the foreground. So they abandoned ship. they all gathered on the ice after they'd abandoned ship, and Shackleton sort of was going to speak to them. And I think everyone was kind of wondering, what's he going to say? Are we carrying on? What are we going to do? And he basically just went up to them and said, well, ship and stores are gone. Now we go home. Not the easiest thing to do. So he issued the order. He said that every man could take £2 of personal gear. And to set that example, he threw away his gold watch, his gold cigarette case, and some money, but did save a banjo for morale. So they had a banjo with them, and basically just wanted to get rid of all non-essentials to keep it as light as possible. And to get over the fact that, the guys had lost their ship, the next morning he actually made hot milk and took it to everybody, just to kind of, I guess, keep everybody slightly happy and keep the morale up. So that was on November the 21st. The Endurance actually sank, and Shackleton planned a march essentially to try and get them closer to open water. So they pulled two of the lifeboats in harnesses on sledges. I think it was about 450 kilograms each. So that's a lot. And I think in 2 days they'd only covered 2 miles. The ice wasn't going anywhere. And food started to become a problem. They were running low on blubber. They couldn't find that many penguins to eat. Not that I'm sure penguins were very tasty. And in January, they had to kill the dogs, which was a very sad decision. And the chap who was actually kind of in charge of the dogs took it on himself to do it, but said that it was the worst job he'd ever done. The dog food became food for the crew. They also ate the dogs. And then they went back to the ship, some of them to bring back some extra supplies. And then they later decided to go and bring back the third lifeboat. I think at one point they killed something like 300 Adelie penguins for food and fuel. And they called it hoosh, the penguin stew. Not a meal that I hope we will be served. I can't imagine that penguin is the tastiest thing. Now, Martin was talking about Elephant Island. Elephant Island is really, really significant. So in April 1916, Shackleton basically made the decision that they needed to get away and find some land. So he led them all into their 3 lifeboats, and they managed to sail across to Elephant Island. They got there seven days later. They were chafed, they were thirsty, they were covered in salt, they had blisters on their hands. So obviously rowing was miserable. And a lot of them, because of the salt water, were covered in boils. So this is not the kind of, I don't know, there's a tendency, I think, to romanticize some of these things as heroism, but it was just miserable for them. By the time they got to their camp there, some of them had frostbite. They were exhausted. They actually thought one of them had had a heart attack. One of the crew members they thought had had a heart attack. But again, everybody was still alive at this point, which is astounding, really, although they weren't in a good way. And so Shackleton made the decision that they needed to go and get help, and decided to set off again in the lifeboat, the James Caird, with a small crew, basically, to try and get across to South Georgia. Where's my maps? There we go. So this is the James Caird. You can see the size of it. This is the largest of their lifeboats at 23 foot. Not very comfortable, but in April, Frank Worsley managed to get a sunny day with a clear horizon, so he could get a sight for his chronometer. And on that day, Shackleton and Frank Worsley and 4 other men set off. So Shackleton was kind of in command, in charge, but navigation was left to Frank Worsley because that was his thing. And they also had on board a guy called Tom Crean and 3 seamen, as well as including the carpenter, McNeish. And when the decision was kind of made to leave, Shackleton left Frank Wild in charge of 21 men on Elephant Island, and everyone very much knew he was in charge. And Shackleton had kind of left him there because I think he had the full confidence that Wild would succeed, and he did. There's a great quote by Frank Worsley about their time in the James Caird, saying that the routine was 3 men in bags deluding themselves that they were sleeping, and 3 men on deck, one steering for an hour, the other 2 bailing or handling sails or sitting in the saloon. We were soaked on an average every 3 or 4 minutes. This went on day and night. The cold was intense. So not a great experience. Obviously, the seas that they're going through were known for kind of 60-foot waves, rogue waves, everything. At one point, I think they had something like 15 inches or 15 centimeters of ice that they had to keep chipping off the boat because it was weighing it down so low into the water that they were starting to take on water. And Shackleton's plan essentially was to kind of sail north until they caught the currents of the Drake Passage, which is obviously where the cruise will be going, which is, again, like I said, known for the rough seas. And for some context, they're doing this in woolen jumpers and some overalls, which, whilst warm, left them pretty damp. And Shackleton's leadership at this point is really the most important thing, I think. Between meals, if he thought people needed cheering up, he issued a snack. And I think it's down to his morale and realizing what the guys needed that actually they all survived, although they were very close to death, I would say. It was an awful, awful voyage. Now, Frank Worsley's navigation was incredible. And there's a whole article that was written by somebody, it's about 40 pages long, just on his navigation, which obviously I'm not going to go into. But for the people that perhaps don't understand about navigation at the time, you had to work out your location in latitude and longitude, obviously. Now, latitude is easy to find because you use the angle of the sun above the horizon at noon. Bit difficult when you don't see the sun very often. And then longitude meant that you had to compare local noon, so the point that the sun was at its highest, with the actual time at another location where the longitude was known. So the key, obviously, for that was making sure that the time measurement you had for that other location was actually accurate. So making those is difficult enough on land, even more difficult when you have very few points of land visible in bad weather. Nearly impossible, in fact. So they were mostly kind of depending on dead reckoning, which is where you calculate your position using a position that you've previously worked out, and then use estimates of kind of how fast and which way you're moving. Now, Worsley called it his seaman's calculation of courses and distance. And actually, the way that he would go about it was balancing himself on the gunwale of the boat with his arm around the mast. And as I said, you can see here, this is a very small, small boat, small area, and had to wait for the sun, got his observation, compared the measurement with the time on the chronometer, and then had some tables of calculations that he'd brought because thankfully, before the Endurance was crushed, he'd worked out distances from the South Orkneys to South Georgia and the Falklands and Cape Horn. So he was quite prepared, I guess, in that respect. I've got a quote here that I'm going to read. It's a little bit long, but I think it sums up Worsley's navigational ideas, really. He wrote that navigation is an art, but words fail to give my effects the correct name. Once or twice a week, the sun smiled, a sudden wintry flicker through storm-torn cloud, and if we were ready for it and smart, I caught it. The procedure was peering out from our burrow, precious sextant under my chest to prevent the seas from falling on it. Sir Ernest stood under the canvas with chronometer, pencil, and book. I shouted, stand by, and knelt on the thwart. Two men held me up on each side. I brought the sun to where the horizon ought to be, and then as the boat leapt frantically upward on the crest of a wave, snapped a guess at the altitude and yelled stop. Sir Ernest took the time, I worked out the result, and then we had to interpret his wobbly figures, my own so illegible that I had to recognize them by feats of memory, which gives you an idea of how difficult this is. But somehow, after 17 days at sea, they actually managed to spot land. They unfortunately faced a hurricane, so they were slightly delayed in pulling into King Haakon Bay, but they managed to. And they said that they hadn't been that comfortable in about 5 weeks. They had an albatross and gravy for dinner. Again, another tasty meal, but I think compared to biscuits and penguin, probably quite nice. So leaving 3 men with the James Caird, Shackleton, Tom Crean, and Frank Worsley, headed across South Georgia. Very, very much unmapped mountains. They didn't have maps. They didn't have any idea of where they were going. There were glaciers, and they managed to do it in 36 hours, which is incredible considering the state of the clothing they had. They had frostbitten feet. They had very little food. They ditched their sleeping bags at this point because everything was wet, and they had very, very salty clothes. So it would have been incredibly, incredibly uncomfortable for them, but they did it. This is a great picture here from Elephant Island as the crew were being rescued. So Shackleton et al. Obviously had reached Stromness May 1916. And now the whalers were really, really amazed, A, by the fact they'd managed to cross South Georgia, but also the fact they'd managed to get there from Elephant Island in the first place. And his first job was to go back and get the 3 guys that he'd left before they headed across South Georgia. And they came back, had lots of food, spun lots of stories, and then tried to work out a plan for picking up the rest of his guys. He didn't know whether they were going to be alive or not. The food was rapidly dwindling back on Elephant Island. and they were really struggling. So they made 4 attempts. Some of them were cancelled due to the weather, some cancelled due to the ice. And after 128 days, they eventually managed to use this ship here, the Chilean naval tug Yelcho, and managed to get there in August 1916. Remember that they left in the James Caird in April. Now, miraculously, every single crew member was still alive, although a few amputations of toes had happened. And Shackleton later wrote a letter to his wife basically saying, "I've done it, damn the Admiralty, not a life lost, and we've been through hell." Now, one of the things that I've spoken of previously, A, in this talk, and B, when I was down in the Falklands, was Shackleton's kind of leadership ability and legacy. So he made a lot of tough choices, which were obviously difficult for him, but ultimately led to the survival of his crew during this expedition. And his main focuses were always safety and survival. Never let any of his stress show, never let his nerves show, didn't show any anxiety. And a good kind of comparison for that is the Karluk expedition to the Arctic in 1913. Shackleton, obviously, all of his men survived. And I guess by contrast, the leader of the Karluk expedition just abandoned his men when his ship became trapped in the ice, and 11 of them died. There's a great poster that goes around attributed to Shackleton, but no one's ever really proved that it was put out by him. The mythical advert saying, you know, safe return doubtful, men wanted for hazardous voyage. And I think one of the things, if that was true, is the fact that, you know, he'd said that the safe return was doubtful. He hadn't missold it to anybody, really. And I think as for how much it matters, a good story is that of Sir Edmund Hillary, obviously, again, famous explorer, went to summit Mount Everest. And he later, I think 40 years after this, managed to complete the expedition of crossing Antarctica, pretty much on the same route that Shackleton had planned to do. And when he was asked about Shackleton, he used a quote by Sir Raymond Priestley, which was my quote on my first slide. For scientific discovery, give me Scott. For speed and efficiency, give me Amundsen. But when disaster strikes and all hope is gone, get down on your knees and pray for Shackleton. There's a couple of leadership quotes which hopefully you've been able to read through while I've been nattering. But I think it really gives an idea of what his men thought of him. You know, by self-sacrifice and throwing his own life into the balance, he saved every one of his men. Not a life was lost. Although at times it had looked unlikely one could be saved, his outstanding characteristics were his care of and anxiety for the lives and well-being of all his men. And Shackleton himself once said, if you're a leader, a fellow that other fellows look to, you've got to keep going. And he very much did. And I think the application in modern leadership is the same, the decisiveness, the inclusivity, the understanding, that kind of delegation of tasks and clarity of the task, the teamwork, the boundaries, the planning, and essentially the communication mostly. And this quote on the left is one that Shackleton always used when he was talking about people that he selected for his crews, and that the quality he looked for the most was optimism, especially in the face of reverse and apparent defeat, and that optimum is true moral courage. And I think optimism is really what got most of them through a lot of this. And like I said, with that, the planning of the Alaska expedition, that optimism that everything was going to be okay. His later life, this is another great picture. This is him in all his foul weather gear, very different to what we have nowadays. He went back to Great Britain, obviously, after this, and he was assigned actually by the British government to do a propaganda mission in South America because he knew his way around. Between 1918 and 1919, he was with the North Russian Expeditionary Force, served as a major, slightly different to his time in the Merchant Navy and the R&R. And then post-war, again, he tried to a different number of business plans, I guess, and business opportunities. And again, none of them worked. He also tried to plan an Arctic Canada expedition, didn't happen, but did manage eventually to get some backing from John Quiller Rowett, and they were planning another trip south, leading the Shackleton Rowett Antarctic expedition. And that was also known as the Quest expedition. Obviously, recently we've just it's just been discovered, the Quest, which is fantastic news, along with Endurance a couple of years ago, like I said. And actually, for that Quest expedition, 8 men that served on the Endurance with him went with him, which I think is a testament to how much they thought of him and wanted to serve with him and would follow him anywhere. So this expedition headed off from London in 1921. They arrived in South Georgia on the 4th of January 1922, and sadly on the 5th of January 1922, Shackleton suffered a heart attack and died in Grytviken, where he was buried in the whalers' graveyard overlooking the bay, which is the picture you saw that Martin showed earlier. And it's where he remains to this day for people to toast the boss. So yeah, happy to take any questions now if Martin has some to ping in my direction. Um, but otherwise, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thanks, Kate. It's just such an incredible story, isn't it? Well, a
It's
series
really
of
difficult because
stories.
there's so much to cover, and I think each of those expeditions on their own could be their own their own sort of 1 hour talk, really. But trying to cover the most important bits.
No, thank you so much. And I guess just also to cover just very quickly, we are essentially going to be retracing Shackleton's sailing route. We won't take anywhere near as long as he did on our aboard our ship, and the ship is far more capable of dealing with it. But looking at that picture, because also in South Georgia in Grytviken, you've got there is a replica of the James Caird. I mean, it is a tiny lifeboat, isn't it, Kate? I mean, I think
Oh,
you mentioned something about a
23 foot.
saloon. There's no saloon on this
No,
lifeboat,
the
is there?
saloon is the little sort of dipped in area. um, but yeah, I think the actual James Caird is actually now at Dulwich College, so people can go and see it.
I mean, it just must have been absolute hell. And the other part of the story that I picked out that I also couldn't believe is you said they also dug out and moved the Endurance by 400 meters when they were sort of
400
still trying to
meters, yeah.
get
Ship
out of
back
the
using
ice as well.
ropes. Yeah, it's insane. It's a huge feat. And I think one of the things that I think about is I went to a talk recently by the expedition leader of the Endurance Discovery expedition recently, and they were saying about how awful the ice was for them, and they're in a big metal, ice breaking expedition research ship. So thinking about what it was like for these guys in this would, I mean, if anyone's been to see the Discovery up in Dundee, very, very similar. It's quite astounding to think about trying to push that back through the ice at all, really.
Yeah, it just absolutely amazes me. And I suppose, Kate, just to sort of come up, because obviously you're joining us on the cruise, which is brilliant, and you're going to sort of bring to life, I think, the sort of Shackleton, various Shackleton expeditions, as well as the Great
Yeah,
Explorers, over sort of a series of lectures, aren't you? So there's more to come.
there's a lot more
If
to come. Yeah, like I think I could keep going for hours if people wanted.
well, we'll have the lectures, and then I guess you can also continue in the bar afterwards if
Yeah,
if you wish as well, which would be absolutely
absolutely.
fine. There is a couple of comments I think just to say from Paula. Thank you, Kate. Really interesting. I can tell you're very absorbed by his whole short life. Graham Sagar, apologies if I've pronounced that incorrectly. As I said, were there any plans to raise the Discovery? Is that even technically feasible? Have you heard anything about what they're planning on doing now they've discovered the Discovery?
Oh, the quest. So the Discovery is actually in Dundee. You can go on her.
Ah,
She's
okay.
open. As for the quest, I haven't seen anything about them raising it. I think at the moment they're trying to do the same as they did with the Endurance, sort of log it, do the scientific research, and they've done some full, I think, laser scans of the Endurance. So they have managed to map out the entire ship, which is incredible. I think that was the plan for the quest as well. There's actually a documentary someone told me about the Endurance coming out. I think Dan Snow is hosting it. So I don't know when that's coming, but I think it was supposed to come in January and it hasn't materialized yet. But it's I think with National Geographic. So when that comes out, that will be fantastic.
Yeah, well, yeah, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Henry Ford asks us quite this question. That image on the book cover looks like the wooden railway bridge, pardon me, at Barmouth. Was Barmouth notable in maritime history in this presentation's context?
No, that was just my final slide that I have on all of my presentations at the moment for the book I edited with the Royal Navy Strategic Studies Centre. But it is Barmouth. Yeah, absolutely correct.
Ah, great spot then. Great question.
I didn't even know it was Barmouth until somebody actually messaged me telling me about it and went, "Oh yeah, okay, yeah, perfect." Terrible book editor knowledge there.
but not much in maritime history. Graham Brody asks, says, great talk. How long did they spend trekking across the ice, dragging the boats before sailing to Elephant Island?
Yeah,
Good
so they
question.
in various sort of stages because it was quite an epic. I think they spent about 5 months actually trekking across the ice before they decided that they should head to Elephant Island. So obviously, like I said, Endurance was trapped, and they were initially camping on the ice. They tried to go across the ice, I think, December 1915. So obviously she sank November, but found it really difficult. Then they got to April 1916 and realized that basically they weren't going to be drifting close enough to land on the ice, which was the original plan. So that's when they decided to launch the lifeboats and head across to Elephant Island.
Wow, fine. Yeah, I mean it's the time, isn't it, that is just also
I think, yeah, that's the most astounding. You're talking months
astounding. Yeah.
between them. I mean, the worst one must have been for the guys that were left behind when they went across in the James Caird because they, April to yeah, what, 4 months, 4 and a bit months they were there. And obviously there was no communications. Nowadays you could radio and sort of ask if everybody's okay, but they didn't have that. There was no means of contact and they had no idea whether they'd be going back to dead bodies or anything, in fact, which is quite daunting. But Shackleton was absolutely adamant that they were going to do what they could. Like I said, they made quite a few attempts before they managed to eventually successfully get there just because of the weather and the ice. Because like you said, it's all very much down to the weather at that point.
Brilliant. Brilliant. And Trevor, just a quick one, is asked, is this recorded for looking at later? Yeah, Trevor, we will put this up on our YouTube channel. We can probably go up tomorrow, so if you sort of check mid-afternoon onwards, if you wish to rewatch anything, it'll be on there. And so, Kate, just one last question because I appreciate on time as well. Obviously, you're joining us on our cruise, so there's going to be a sort of series of lectures from you during the cruise. I think a few focused around the Shackleton story as we kind of retrace those footsteps. Any teasers as to, and I guess you've mentioned Scott. I think he'll probably come up a
Yeah,
little bit as well, I imagine. Any teasers there?
Scott will pop up. Amundsen will inevitably pop up. Another person that I think is pretty wonderful, and even Ranulph Fiennes agrees with me on that one, so I'm in good company. Probably also going to maybe cover a little bit back into the 18th century and look at things like Captain Cook, because obviously they were the first sort of to get as close as realistically they were before we got to this point. James Clark Ross will obviously pop up, hence the name of the Ross Ice Shelf. So a little bit of sort of earlier Antarctic history, a little bit of the kind of Shackleton Scott Amundsen period, and then maybe coming forward perhaps a little bit about the Royal Navy in the South Atlantic, obviously in the Second World War as well. I think that would be quite good as we're going to the Falklands.
Brilliant. Is there? I'll put you on the spot, and just is there? If anyone wants to do a bit of reading, like, is there any good, ahead just to sort of get a bit of a? I mean, without stealing the thunder from what you're going to talk, but is there any sort of good books that might be worth a little bringing with or
Yeah,
reading?
absolutely. So on Shackleton especially, I genuinely the Ranulph Fiennes biography I think is it's very easy reading if you don't want something heavy. There is a book that's slightly frowned upon, which I was using to prop up my laptop by Roland Huntford, which is quite large, but is also a little bit controversial because I think some of the ideas that he has are quite well controversial and sort of based around a lot of what's the word I want disagreements people had had. But it's a good book. The facts are there, and obviously Shackleton's own work, South, I think would be worth reading. Just it's his own thoughts. You can find memoirs by Frank Worsley as well online, which are great, and sort of give you more of an idea of what it was like for the guys with Shackleton, because I think so much is focused on Shackleton. And one of the things I like to focus on when I'm doing history presentations or talks is the other people as well, because obviously Shackleton led that expedition, but everyone else made it happen with him, which I think is quite important.
Absolutely. Was he the only one knighted out of
So yeah,
yeah?
there was
So
there was a bit of controversy. They got medals, but the carpenter famously had his held back because he'd had a disagreement with Shackleton, which caused again a little bit of controversy, especially because he'd been in the James Caird. Um, but he had at one
oh,
point
really
incited a bit of mutinous talk, I think, so wasn't the most popular chap.
brilliant. Great. Well, Kate, thank you so much. And also, just to sort of mention as well, again, hope I do hope we get into Great Beacon on the cruise. As mentioned, everything is subject to wind, weather, and sea conditions. But Kate, you've also agreed, provided we get into Great Beacon, that you're going to sort of hold a little moment at the boss's grave as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, really hope we manage to get that executed as well. So thank you so much. Kate, thank you so much for that talk. A real teaser. I'm really looking forward to the talks that you're going to give on our cruise. That will be part of a wider program as well, given by the whole expedition team on all sorts of areas, from wildlife to ice to everything you could need to know about penguins. It will depend on the expertise of the team on board, and then Kate's going to be there to give a real historical point of view on there as well. So thank you so much, Kate. I'm just going to re-share my screen just to go through a couple of final quick points, and we shall then draw the all important prize draw as well. So that's the slide I finished. That's the slide of our route, which hopefully all makes a lot of sense, and you can pick out the bits with Elephant Island and over to South Georgia, where we'll be retracing Shackleton's footsteps. If you are not booked with us and you are interested in coming, the prices start from £14,999 per person in our triple cabin, and go up depending on what grade of cabin you're looking for. Everything's included on the ship, so you've got the 21-night cruise, you've got the night in Buenos Aires as well, making a 23-day itinerary. Internal flights between Buenos Aires and Ushuaia in economy are included on our group flight. A program of landings for each half day in Antarctica. A program of landing, sorry, for every day that we're spending in Antarctica, South Georgia, and Falklands. We will, as mentioned, have an expedition team on board as well. So the ratio, there will be around seven, at least sort of seven expert special guests, an expedition team for no more than 66 passengers. So that's there will be an expert for every less than 10 passengers, which again is industry leading. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day on the cruise. Dinner on the first day of the cruise, breakfast on the last. Breakfast at the hotel in Buenos Aires. Coffee, tea, and water 24 hours a day. You'll never be short of a cup of tea. We are providing, there is rubber boots to borrow for shore landings, though you may prefer to take your own. All the transfers and stuff that you need on there. So it's a very encompassing price. There's a few exclusions which are listed down the right-hand side, but obviously one of our travel specialists can give you the full details on there. We have got some special offers as well at the moment. So there is £1,000 per person off the prices you've just seen for twin bunk cabins on the upper berths, as well as the twin porthole cabins. So there's £1,000 per person off those cabin types. There is £500 per person off selected other cabin types as well. And as mentioned, the bunk cabins can be taken on a solo basis for a special price of just £18,999, which is one of the lowest solo prices for a full Antarctic, Falklands, and South Georgia cruise. We are limited on availability. We have got cabins left, but the ship is not massive, so we haven't got loads. So we are very short in the triple department. We are very short in twin premiers and twin deluxes. There is still cabins available, but not many. We also have two of the suites remaining as well. So obviously there's not an abundance of any cabin type because of the size of the ship, but if a triple that sort of lead-in price or the sort of twin premier or twin deluxe cabins are of interest, then please do let us know super soon on those. So, just to finish and conclude, our prize winner, I've drawn it while Kate was kindly talking, and tonight's winner is Bruce Lloyd. So, Bruce, congratulations to you. You have the choice of a bottle of Shackleton's whiskey, which would seem most appropriate, but you have also got the option of the Pink Pepper Kitchen chocolate brownies in Polar Bear tin as well. If you'd like to claim those, please email info@polarroutes.co.uk to claim your prize. If you are super inspired and would like to hold a cabin or even book a cabin tonight, the phone lines are closed, but you can email info@polarroutes.co.uk and a member of the team will get back to you tonight. So if you would like to join us, hold a cabin, book a cabin, please email info@polarroutes.co.uk particularly perhaps if you're looking at one of those cabins where we have got very limited availability. If you'd like to talk with someone, we're open tomorrow from 9 a.m. Call us on the number on screen, 0203 196 1000, or of course visit our website. That is it. Thank you so much. I'll leave it with this screen, which is a shot from the bow of the MV Ushuaia going through the Lemaire Channel, somewhere I hope that we get to go through. And if we got to go through on a day as incredibly beautiful as this one, I will be extremely, extremely happy. I say that because I will also be on board as guest services manager as well. So I hope that you will join us on board the MV Ushuaia. Thank you so much again to Kate. I think she's headed off, but thank you so much to Kate for that wonderful presentation. And oh, she is still there. Sorry, Kate. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate what a wonderful talk. Yeah, really look forward to seeing you in February and hearing some more. And we'll get those book recommendations. We'll send out final information for those that are booked on the cruise, and I'll get those recommendations off you as well. That's it from us. I hope you have a really good evening, and we'll see you again soon for another Polar Routes Inspiration series, and hope to see you in Antarctica or in the polar regions soon. Thank you very much. Good night.